All right. Well, thank you all for joining. I think it's about time to get started. We'll let everyone else filter in, but we will get started now. So good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining this exciting webinar about mitigating cybersecurity and CMMC risk with compliance. My name is Chase Leby. I'm one of the founding partners at Appcom Partners, and I'll be our host today, walking us through the webinar. I'm very excited to introduce to you our guest speakers for today. Matthew Travis is the CEO of Cyber AB, overseeing all CMMC accreditation and CMMC ecosystem operations of the organization in support of the DoD. Amir Armand is the founder of Kieri Solutions, an authorized C3PAO, and she currently leads a team of cybersecurity consultants and assessors who help defense contractors achieve compliance and security. Ben Gerenstein is the CEO of Rimstorm Inc., a cybersecurity firm specializing in compliance for the DIB. He's a CCP and certified CMMC assessor and was one of the original CMMC assessors. And last but not least, we have Mark Berman, the CEO and founder of FutureFeed.co, a compliance platform focused on NIST, CMMC, and other compliance standards. So looking at the agenda for our webinar today, first up, Matt will discuss the CMMC final rule timeline and what the DIB can expect to see in 2025. Then I'll walk us through some of the challenges and solutions of cybersecurity risk with some real-world examples. Amira will then demystify CUI in her section, Do I Even Have CUI? Ben will follow that with a discussion around important enclave considerations, and Mark will close us out with some thoughts on documenting and tracking compliance. We will have some time set aside for Q&A at the end of the webinar, so please put your questions in the Q&A chat as we work through the presentation, and we'll circle back to those questions at the end. Again, thank you all for joining us today, and with that, I'd like to turn it over to Matthew Travis to get us started with the CMMC timeline. Matt?
Hey, thanks, Chase. Good to be with you and everyone else today. Season's greetings, and boy, you couldn't pick a more timely date to hold the CMMC webinar, as we are in literally the final throes of preparing for CMMC to become an official DoD program. So when you think about timelines, many of us have been on a very long timeline, going back more than just a couple of years when CMMC was first conceived, and it's kind of hard to believe that after all those twists and turns that we're on the cusp of CMMC operational launch as an official program. Before I get into it, as you mentioned, Chase, Cyber AB supports DoD through a no-cost contract. We are independent organizations, and nothing I say should be construed as representing official DoD policy or U.S. government policy. So I always want to get that out of the way. But for those of you who are following kind of the rulemaking journey of the past couple of years, might recall that in October 15th, the final rule was published in the Federal Register. That had a 60-day window before it becomes effective and enforced. And so 60 days is now December 16th. So next Monday, a week from today, CMMC as a DoD program enters into force, and CMMC essentially becomes for real. There's still congressional review that's ongoing, and that'll carry into the next Congress. Do not expect anything that would have to require a full repeal of both the House and Senate and the president to sign. I don't see that happening. So we're very confident CMMC on the 16th of December becomes a program. Important to note, though, that this is the program of CMMC, not any of the procurement requirements tied to contracts. That'll come in when the Title 48 rule finishes its rulemaking journey. So what we have is the Title 32 rule. The Title 32 of the Code of Federal Regulations deals with national defense programs. So CMMC, starting next Monday, is an official DoD program ensconced in the CFR. The Title 48 rule deals with all the contractual requirements, the procurement and acquisition implications of not of having to conform to the CMMC standard and consequences if a DIB company does not. That is still going through rulemaking. We saw the proposed Title 48 rule this summer. The public comment period for that ran through October. And so right now, both DoD and OMB are working through the responses and questions to that rule. We would expect that to show itself sometime, I think, in Q1 of calendar year 2025, and then that too would probably have a 30 or 60-day window before it becomes effective into force. So I would say sometime in certainly the first half of 2025, the Title 48 will be locked in, and that's really when the clock starts. If you look at the Title 32 rule, it talks about the 4 phases of CMMC, what's going to happen the first year and the second year. That clock doesn't start until the Title 48, it's called the DFARS rule, enters into force. And for that, so what does that all mean in terms of what happens on December 16th? Well, that means that the program is alive, and we now, in our role as the accreditation body, will start authorizing or really reauthorizing companies like Amira's under the adjusted requirements of the Title 32 rule. So we've been authorizing C3POs kind of in a provisional manner based on initial CMMC requirements. And when we saw the final rule, there were some additional things that had to be done. So we'll be reauthorizing what is now about 62 C3POs, and they will now be free and clear to begin CMMC Level 2 certification assessments for those companies who are ready to go, who have implemented NIST 800-171 Rev 2, and want to go ahead and get their certificate of CMMC status. Now, because of the holidays, and we're still working with DoD to get things like EMAS training, get some of the AB's documentation out there, Level 2 certification assessment won't start until January 2nd. So we'll get through the holiday period. Those authorized C3POs can then start on Thursday, January 2nd to begin CMMC Level 2 certification assessments. We are working to publish, and we'll publish on Monday the 16th, things like the CMMC assessment process, or the CAP, as well as the revised CMMC Code of Professional Conduct, or the COPC. So that's really what we're working on this week. Also things like designing and getting approval on what the actual certificate for a Level 2 certification assessment will look like, getting those authorized C3POs trained up on EMAS and getting them access to EMAS. EMAS is the official IT system of record. That's a DoD network where all the CMMC assessment results will be uploaded and stored. So it's, as you can imagine, Chase, a bit of a frenetic week ahead as we try to lock in all of the requirement documentation and processes. You'll see updates on the AB website with some of these documents I mentioned, as well as some of our policies as regards to CMMC appeals, complaint policy, and all those things that go along with the program. So you might not notice anything per se on December 16th, but when we get through the holiday period starting January 2nd, those C3POs who have reasserted themselves, meet all the requirements as per the Title 32 rule, will be authorized C3POs, can start doing the assessments. And I think that's pretty exciting, because we know both from the joint surveillance program that occurred over the past couple of years that a lot of DIB companies have not been waiting, for the DFARS rule to force their hand. They want to make sure that they are honoring the commitments they've already made with the 7012 clause that are in their contracts, as well as symbolically support DoD in what is the most important supply chain security initiative. So we do expect and know from a number of these pre-authorized C3POs that they have clients already signed up, that their dance card, if you will, is loaded for a number of months into 2025. So on that January 2nd date, we will be seeing companies get certified at Level 2 in CMMC, and that's really exciting. I think that's when you talk about what to expect in 2025. Again, we'll be in a voluntary phase in terms of no one is forced from CMMC to get the C3PO assessment. But again, there'll be a voluntary program that's in effect. And also per the phase of CMMC, you're also going to see contracts get that language for doing self-assessment. That will be required as part of that phase 1. So even if you decide you're not ready to hire a C3PO and get a certification assessment, once that 48 CFR rule is in place, you're likely going to see language in the next time your contract is an option year's exercise or any new awards. You'll see that language that will at least require you to do a formal self-assessment of CMMC. So exciting times. We're all very busy, but it's going to be busy. It's been a long wait. And so we're really excited for not only the ecosystem, but for DoD and the entire DIB as well. So that's where we are. And I'll turn it back to you, Chase.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Matt. So I will be kicking off our section on cybersecurity risk for the DIB. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about something that's really shaping our defense industrial base, and that's the evolving landscape of risk management. At Appcom Partners, we've had the privilege of working with companies across the DIB, and I want to share some of what we're seeing on the ground. So, when we talk about risk in the defense industry, it's really fascinating how interconnected everything is. We typically look at risk across five major categories, and I'd like to break these down for you because understanding how they interact is crucial to what we do. First up, there's cybersecurity risk, and that's the big one we'll dive into today. But it's not just about protecting data anymore. We're talking about the entire digital footprint of a company. Every email sent, every technical drawing accessed, every supplier portal logged into, these are all potential points of vulnerability that need to be managed. Financial risk is next, and it's the one that keeps most CEOs up at night. I was just talking to a mid-sized supplier last week who put it perfectly. He said, it's not just about having enough cash flow to keep the lights on anymore. Now I need to budget for cybersecurity tools I've never heard of, training for staff who barely use computers, and compliance assessments that cost more than my first CNC machine. That's the reality that many companies are facing. Operational risk is particularly interesting because it touches everything else. It's about how you run your business day to day. Think about a small machine shop that's been using the same processes for 20 years. Now they need to change how they receive technical data, how they store it, how they communicate with their prime contractor. All of this is essentially rewriting their entire operational playbook. And then there's FOCI risk, foreign ownership, control, or influence. This one's become increasingly complex in today's global economy. We're seeing companies have to carefully examine everything from their supply chains to their workforce to their investment partners. Just last month, I worked with a company who had to completely restructure their entire board because they discovered one of their members had ties to a foreign entity. And then there's reputational risk, which can make or break a company in our interconnected world. A single security breach, a missed compliance deadline, or even the perception of inadequate security measures can have a devastating effect on a company's standing in the DIB. But now here's what's really interesting. We're seeing a massive shift in how the DIB approaches these risks, particularly when it comes to cybersecurity. With CMMC becoming law, it's not just a nice to have anymore, it's a must have. And let me tell you, this is causing quite a stir throughout the entire supply chain. What's particularly fascinating and concerning is how this is affecting the entire ecosystem. Prime contractors and their OEMs, they're not just worried about their direct suppliers anymore. They're looking 2, 3 tiers deep into their supply chain. Why? Because they've realized that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And sometimes that weak link might be a small machine shop that's handling critical technical data. So let me share something with you that we're repeatedly seeing in our work. These smaller suppliers, the ones that are 2 or 3 tiers down, they're often caught completely off guard. Imagine running a successful small manufacturing business for 20 years, and suddenly you're being told you need to comply with cybersecurity requirements that sound like they're written in a foreign language. DFAR 7012, NIST 800-171. For many of these folks, it might as well be ancient Greek. The challenges we're seeing are substantial, and I want to break these down because they affect different companies in different ways. So let's start with the cost of CMMC. This isn't just about buying new software or hardware. We're talking about comprehensive costs that many companies have never anticipated. There's the cost of new technology, yes, but also the cost of training, documentation, possible facility modifications, and ongoing maintenance. One small manufacturer I worked with recently discovered that their CMMC compliance journey would cost roughly the same as their annual IT budget, and that was just for the initial implementation. The level of effort needed to achieve compliance is another major hurdle. And this isn't just about the hours spent implementing new systems, it's about the cultural shift required. I remember visiting a company where the owner had been running his business successfully for 30 years. His response to cybersecurity requirements? We've never had a problem before, so why change now? This kind of mindset shift is often harder to achieve than the technical challenges. And then there's a disconnect between OEMs and suppliers about what CUI actually entails. I was in a meeting recently where a supplier and the prime contractor spent 2 hours debating what constituted CUI in their technical drawings. The supplier thought that only the final specifications were CUI, while the prime considered the entire design process sensitive. This kind of misalignment can lead to serious security gaps. Then there's the resistance to change, what I call the if it ain't broke, don't fix it syndrome. Many companies have developed efficient, albeit non-compliant systems over the decades. They're using familiar tools, familiar processes, and familiar workflows. Asking them to uproot all of this for compliance is like asking them to learn a new language while running a marathon. And then perhaps the most challenging is the business case issue. I worked with a supplier recently who only had about 25% of their business with the DoD. They're looking at compliance costs that would eat up most of their profit margins on these contracts, and their question to me was simple but profound. How do we justify spending this much when the return might not be there? This is a legitimate concern that many smaller suppliers are currently grappling with. But this is where our approach at Appcom Partners comes in, and I think it's what makes our work particularly effective. We don't just walk in with a checklist of compliance requirements, but instead we start by really understanding each supplier's business needs. What is their business model? How much of their work is government related? What is their current process for handling sensitive information? These questions help us understand not just where they need to go, but how to get them there in a way that makes sense for their business. So let me share a story that I think really illustrates this approach. Recently, I worked with a small plastic machine shop. And when I say small, I mean it was less than 10 employees working out of a garage in Arizona. They weren't tech-savvy millennials. These were experienced machinists who had been perfecting their craft for decades. They make a small but absolutely critical plastic component for a major prime contractor. When they had first heard about DFAR 7012 and the need to comply with NIST 800-171, they were completely lost. They started looking up cybersecurity solutions online, and they found themselves staring at enterprise-level solutions with price tags that would have basically put them out of business. We're talking about costs that were nearly half of their annual revenue. It just simply wasn't feasible. But here's where it gets interesting. When we got involved, and by the way, the prime contractor brought us in because they recognized how valuable this supplier was to their supply chain. We started by sitting down with the supplier to understand their operation. What we found was pretty enlightening. About 95% of their business was with this one prime contractor, so pivoting to a purely commercial work just wasn't an option. But here's the key thing we discovered. Their actual handling of CUI was minimal. They worked with the same technical drawings they've been using for years, basically just needing to reference a PDF while operating their tooling machines. This discovery was crucial because it meant that they didn't need a complete overhaul of their network security. Instead, they were perfect candidates for an enclave system. We introduced them to our partner, Brimstone, who provided them with a fully compliant enclave that met all the contract requirements, but, and this is the critical part, fit within their budget. Now they're on track to be fully compliant by the end of the year, and this small but vital business will continue to be part of our national defense supply chain. Not every case we handle is this straightforward, of course. We work with both the biggest and the smallest companies in the DIB, but what we've consistently found is that defense industrial-based suppliers just need someone in their corner who understands both the technical requirements and the business realities they're facing. For many of you in the audience today, CMMC and cybersecurity might be familiar territory, but for many small and mid-sized suppliers, this is completely new ground. They need education, guidance, and most importantly, practical solutions that work for their specific situation. So I'll leave you with this final thought. The strength of our defense industrial base doesn't just lie in our prime contractors or the latest technological innovations. It lies in the thousands of small and medium-sized businesses that make up the supply chain. Our job isn't just to make these businesses compliant, it's to help them thrive while meeting these new security challenges. So thank you all for your time. I'd be happy to take any questions or discuss specific challenges that you might be facing with your own organization during the Q&A session, or please feel free to follow up with me via email, and we can come back to that at the end. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to Amira. So Amira, please take it away.
Hey folks, so this is a informative section about the number one question that I and my company get from people preparing for CMMC, which is, do I even have CUI? Do I even need to do CMMC? So hopefully we can shed some light on that question. Next slide, please. So first I wanted to talk about what the definition of CUI is, because it's actually pretty helpful to break it down. Controlled unclassified information is information that requires safeguarding. Safeguarding means protection of some sort. So it could be you need to keep it inside of a locked facility, or you need to do cybersecurity for it, or encrypt it. That's safeguarding. Or dissemination controls. Dissemination controls means don't talk about it to certain people. Don't share this information with certain people. That's a dissemination control. Very common dissemination controls for government work are keep it to the United States government and their contractors only, or keep it to United States people, and don't share it with foreigners because we don't want them to get advanced weapon tech. So that's a dissemination control. And then it says pursuant to and consistent with applicable law, regulations, and government-wide policies. Okay, so in the next slides, I'll show you what that actually looks like. But the key thing here is that there is some legal document somewhere that says this specific information needs to be protected as CUI, and you should be able to trace down that legalese to identify the CUI. There are some cases where the categories are extremely broad, but in a lot of cases, they're incredibly narrow, and things that you think might be CUI based on looking up the CUI category information, it actually includes almost nothing. And then finally, is not classified. So this is where that U comes in from the CUI. CUI cannot be classified. It's not classified. And one shorthand reason why that is if we kept all this information in a secure room with no windows, we wouldn't be able to make all the missiles and tanks and uniforms that our military needs, right? We need to have lots of companies out there in the defense industrial base using blue collar workers, to be quite honest, making all this stuff to support our military. So CUI is highly sensitive information in a lot of cases, but we can't classify it because we need to actually share that with our defense industrial base in order to make what we need to make. Next slide, please. All right, so I wanted to show you the steps to figure out if you actually have CUI. And, so you'll be able to get a copy of these slides if you like, or take a screenshot. But the first step is to go to archives.gov/CUI. That's the National Archives website. It's a government website. And they have a category list of the different types of CUI. And then from there, you can look through it. In this example, I'm showing you export controlled as the category. And then once you get into that subcategory of CUI, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page, there's going to be these PDF documents. So if you look at the top right picture here, those are the different legal regulations and government-wide policies and laws that define what is CUI for this category. And you actually have to get to that level to truly understand whether or not you're dealing with CUI. This is where you might pull in a lawyer, or you might pull in a CMMC professional who specializes in CUI to look through it. Or you might just want to pull it, if you're a bigger company, a medium-sized company with a compliance officer on staff, this should be some of the things that they do for you, is to read through this. Next slide, please. Now, one back. Okay, so this is a picture of an actual regulation that defines a dissemination control, right? Remember, that's part of the definition of CUI, a dissemination control for specific type of information. That is what actually makes this information CUI. So in this example, if you look at the little yellow highlighted area, information obtained for the purpose of considering license applications will not be made available to the public, right? So there's an entire category of information that is considered CUI, and it's this big, broad category. But when you actually dive into the regulation, it's license applications, right? A tiny little thing that probably none of us are ever going to see. And that's the case for about 90% of CUI out there. It's these little tiny things that we need to protect. And so working with a professional and actually reading these laws can help you understand that you don't have CUI, it turns out, in a lot of cases. Next slide, please. Okay, so marking. According to DoD Instruction 5248, there's two parties responsible for properly marking CUI, and this has to be done when the CUI is created, when the document is written, when the data is pasted from a schematic into a new file. The government is responsible if they provide CUI to you, the contractor, and whoever created that document is responsible for properly marking it. According to the DoD instruction, if they do not mark it, it's not CUI. It's their responsibility to mark it. It's the creator's responsibility. And you're not really supposed to disagree with that. Okay, so it goes back to the creator. That's their responsibility. And I'll talk about it a little bit later, but no reasonable CMMC assessor is going to hold you accountable if somebody is sending you stuff that's not properly marked. Okay. But there are responsibilities for you as the contractor to properly mark CUI. So if you are in the situation where you create CUI, if you create a document, if you extract some schematics into a different document to send to your vendors, you need to properly mark it and pull those CUI markings down yourself if you're involved with creating it. So you don't just get away scot-free, but if you are in the situation where you never create CUI yourself, that's great, right? Then you can completely rely on the government to do it. And if they do it right, hopefully it's marked. If they do it wrong, that's their problem. Okay. Now, of course, I'm not going to advocate to not protect stuff that you think should be CUI. There's lots of sensitive information out there, but you can point at them and say, look, according to DoD instruction 5248, this is your job, and I can't second guess you, right? Of course, talk to a lawyer. Next slide, please. So a couple solutions or tips for going forward. First off, if you have documents that have distribution statements on them, you know, stuff that says releasable only to United States government and contractors, export controlled, releasable only to US persons, you should treat that as CUI. And generally it's of type controlled technical information, CTI. Okay. Aggregated data does not become CUI. So if you've worked in the government with classified data, it's been beat into you that once you aggregate data enough, it becomes classified, right? If you can take some regular information, and if you put it together, sometimes it becomes classified because the sensitivity of it changes when it's aggregated. That is not how CUI works. Data is either CUI because it fits into that law, regulation, or policy, or it's not. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that data can't become classified. That's a whole nother problem, right? But a lot of people are really worried that, oh, well, I've got, 30 schematics that have to do with the screws and bolts on an airframe. Do those schematics, which are not CUI, become CUI? Well, they're either CUI or not. Each individual schematic is either CUI or not. It's not going to change its status based on putting them together. Next, there actually is a document, a standard document that exists out in the world. It's called a contract data requirements list, which is used to communicate whether data for a contract is CUI. It also can include classified information, whether it's classified or not. So that CDRL is an amazing solution that we all should be asking for from our government and prime when we get into a contract saying, please tell me what is CUI according to you. And I'm trying to push this to everyone that this is something we should be talking about. It exists as a solution. It is a great solution, and unfortunately, too few contracts include it. And then next, I recommend that your compliance department, the one that's in charge of your CMMC program, if you want to make marking CUI easy for your users, then create a central set of properly marked templates. You know, here's the template we use for PowerPoint. This is the template we use for email. This is the template we use for Word documents, for each type of CUI that your company handles. And tell your users to just copy paste from that, as opposed to trying to figure it out from scratch, which is too hard for almost everyone. Next slide, please. All right, so again, reasonable assessors are not going to hold you accountable to unmarked CUI. Okay, we know that this is an impossible situation for you. We are going to hold you accountable for marked CUI though. So don't ignore the stuff that's properly marked. If your CUI gets onto the wrong system, for example, we hear it all the time, we tell the government, don't send us stuff through email, and they still send it through email, right? The proper solution to handle your assessors and make sure that we don't start thinking that your email system is in scope is to treat that situation like a cyber incident and clean it up. Okay, and if you do that, if you proactively remove the CUI from places where it should not be, we're not going to try to assess that system. Next, you can select your own assessment scope. So if you are feeling great about your environment, you've got everything working, you can say, I want my scope to include all the contracts that we do, all of our cage codes, and we'll assess your information system fully. But you can also say, look, we've got a lot of things going on, and I want to only assess, say, an enclave, right, that we're only using for these 2 contracts, or we're going to use for future contracts. And assessors can assess that and certify that. Now, we're not going to say that you're good for everything. We're going to say we assess this one item, this one enclave, this one system, and you're good there. But that gives you a path to make sure you're all set, and then start migrating your operations to that enclave or that certified system. And then finally, if you don't have CUI yet, you're a brand new defense contractor and you're starting to bid, or you don't have a contract that requires CMMC yet, you can always demonstrate your data flows using dummy CUI, right? So just create a little text file that says this is pretend CUI, and then show how you're encrypting it and putting it through secure systems. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's the presentation from me. I just wanted to let you know that my company exists, Carry Solutions. We're an authorized C3POs. We're one of the leaders doing assessments, and we've got one of the largest assessor teams. And then also, we do provide a product called the Carry Compliance Documentation for CMMC Level 2. It's essentially sample policies, procedures, and system security plan written out for a typical small or medium-sized company that tells you exactly what to do. It gives you all the forms and records that you need to do level 2. All right, back to you, Chase. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Amira. So, Ben, let's say that I determined that I do handle CUI. Now what? What are some of the questions that I should ask myself to determine the best path forward?
Thanks, Chase, and thank you everyone for taking the time to attend our webinar today. I'll be covering several important topics today, including what is the CMMC enclave, when you should use the CMMC enclave for compliance, and also when is an enclave not a good fit. I will also provide an overview of an actual enclave solution that is appropriate for small and mid-sized organizations. I'll begin by answering a number of common CMMC enclave questions. So what is a CMMC enclave? In CMMC parlance, an enclave is a set of system resources that operate with the same security domain and that share the protection of a single, common, and continuous security perimeter. In other words, it's a secure area where controlled unclassified information can be stored and accessed. It is also typically cloud-based in a FedRAMP or FedRAMP equivalent cloud, such as Microsoft GCC, GCC High, or AWS GovCloud. Now, why should I use a CMMC enclave? By isolating CUI in a cloud-based enclave, the scope of a CMMC assessment can be limited to the enclave. That means the network at your offices and/or your physical IT infrastructure will not be considered in an assessment. This is an important factor in lowering your costs and simplifying compliance. Is an enclave appropriate for all scenarios? No, it's sometimes more appropriate to simply complete the work you've already started with NIST 800-171 compliance. You may have already invested a lot of time, money, and effort into compliance and may already have the infrastructure mostly in place for your organization's CMMC Level 2 compliance. If you're 80% there and already have extensive policies and procedures written and updated on a regular basis, it probably makes sense to complete the remaining tasks to achieve compliance. You should make sure, however, that you use a qualified CMMC compliance firm to do a pre-assessment prior to scheduling a C3PAO for a formal assessment. What are the best scenarios for using a CMMC enclave? If your CUI can be isolated in a FedRAMP cloud like GCC or GCC High, an enclave may be the right call. Many government contractors only have a need to access CUI that consists of PDF files, Word docs, and other simple file types. These are easy and inexpensive to work with in an enclave. Virtual desktops can be leveraged to ensure the data stays in the enclave. An enclave is also a good solution if your CUI access is limited to a relatively small group of people. If a small percentage of your users need to access CUI, or you have a low employee count, an enclave may be a good fit. You really don't want to have your entire HQ and all of your personnel in the scope of a CMMC assessment if only 10 people need to work with CUI. If you have a low requirement for resource-intensive applications, that also indicates an enclave is a good call. If you're working with CUI Microsoft 365 and/or have PDF files and some AutoCAD users, an enclave works well. If you have a limited IT and compliance staff, using an enclave provider makes a great deal of sense. It's a very heavy lift attempting to comply with 110 controls and 320 objectives unless you have help. A good enclave provider can substantially ease this burden. What should I look for in a CMMC enclave solution? You should look for a vendor that has a mature, complete, and reasonably priced solution. Ideally, the vendor's primary focus should be on compliance solutions for government contractors. My company, Rimstorm, was the first to market with a CMMC Level 2 enclave solution called GovCon Enclave. GovCon Enclave is an encrypted security environment that safely stores CUI. It provides an enclave that can either be permanently deployed or created and destroyed on a per-contract basis. It has extensive security features and addresses both NIST 800-171 and CMMC Level 2 requirements. It also has a comprehensive feature set, including the core enclave, a compliance engine that allows for the creation, maintenance, and enforcement of policies and procedures, a virtual desktop environment, extensive access control features, a managed SIM with SOC support, incident alerting and reporting, a sophisticated IDS to detect threats, and training with ongoing workshops to ensure you maintain your compliance. GovCon Enclave is available in two versions, Tungsten and Titanium. The Tungsten version includes a single enclave and supports all the features and services I've previously described. Our Titanium version is ideal for contract collaboration between primes and subs. Collaboration enclaves can be deployed on a per-contract basis to facilitate secure collaboration. This is a high-level overview of GovCon Enclave's architecture. It is typically deployed in Microsoft GCC or GCC High. It includes an easy-to-use virtual desktop environment and can work with either Microsoft 365 applications or the included Microsoft 365 compatible apps. For CUI ingress and egress, the environment includes a mail server with the required FIPS 140-2 encryption and an enclave file share capability. Our solution is different than most solutions in that we only use GCC high for storage and compute. This minimizes GCC high costs and is cleaner, simpler, and easier to maintain. We also do not require the purchase of Microsoft licenses, and we deploy in the customer's tenant. One important feature of our GovCon Enclave solution is the compliance engine. The compliance engine automates the creation and maintenance of policies and procedures to help ensure compliance with CMMC Level 2. It doesn't stop there, though. It also has a compliance management dashboard that shows you at a glance which controls are not in compliance, so you can easily identify and resolve compliance issues. The compliance assessment prep module automates pre-assessment by generating the required documents for your formal assessment. And finally, it has a compliance enforcer module that ensures applicable technical controls are enforced at the boundary and in the enclave with alerts and automated actions. Here is a screenshot of the dashboard in the compliance engine. As you can see in this example, the score is currently 105 out of 110. It also tracks POEM items and can easily drill down to the objective level. The policies and procedure templates are pre-populated in the compliance engine, and we work with you to complete them. As you can see here, the policies and procedures can be viewed and edited, and they are tagged with the appropriate controls for easy access. Here's an overview of the GovCon Enclave implementation process. We will first gather information and deploy the core enclave in your GCC or GCC High tenant. We will then deploy and configure the virtual desktops based on your application requirements. The policies and procedures are then customized, and finally, we provide training and go live. This is no oversimplification, but it gives you a feel for the process. Unfortunately, there are numerous CMMC compliance vendors out there that appear to have complete solutions, but typically only have a few pieces of the puzzle. A key question to ask is, if I purchase and implement your solution, will I be in a position to pass the CMMC Level 2 assessment? You'll find the answer many times will be, yeah, but. They will say, yeah, but you need a managed SIM from an MSSP. Or, yeah, but you'll need to write all your policies and procedures. Another question to ask is, can you address all of my CMMC needs, or will you be referring me to other vendors? A lot of times the answer will be, yes, you will need to work with partner X for this compliance task and partner Y for another compliance task. There are also a lot of CMMC vendors that would have you believe that you need a ton of Microsoft Cloud services and licensing for CMMC Level 2. That's simply not true. If you're dealing with CUI, that's PDF files, simple Word and Excel docs, you don't need Microsoft 365 licenses. You can use compatible applications and avoid all the associated licensing fees. Another key question to ask is, how long will it take for our organization to achieve full CMMC Level 2 compliance? Don't choose a vendor with an endless consulting engagement that's never quite done. GovCon Enclave also includes extensive support, including 24/7 SOC support, 8x5 help desk, administrative management of the Enclave and the virtual desktops, incident reports, backups, and training. We're truly providing a complete solution for CMMC Level 2. So why choose Rimstorm's GovCon Enclave? It's a complete solution with fast deployment, extensive support, and a reasonable cost. Our solution is mature, and we were the first to launch a CMMC Enclave offering. Thanks for listening to our presentation, and I hope you've found this informative.
That's
Take it
great.
away,
Thank you so
Chase.
much, Ben. Yeah, I appreciate it, Ben. So clearly an Enclave solution can be a great fit for many DIB suppliers, and it's really helpful to understand when that might be a good option for them to pursue. So now, all of this isn't worth much if you can't document and track your compliance journey. So Mark, will you speak a little bit about that side of CMMC?
It would be my pleasure to do so. So you can go ahead and move to the next slide, first slide. So to the point that you just made, Chase, it is really important that you document everything. The difference between your organization now and your organization when it's compliant is that when it is compliant, you will have documented what you do and you'll have evidence to prove what you do. So my assumption is going to be that for everyone on this call, you are already doing the right thing. You have change management meetings, you have policies and procedures, even if they're just verbal and inferred, but you have a standard way of operating. When we have to prove that to people who are going to be total strangers really to your organization, and we have to do that in a 2-week period of time, we have quite a challenge in front of us. Typically, the C3PO assessment is 2 weeks. These people are not allowed to have done prior work for you, so they really don't know you. So we're going to break it down into the way that they operate through interview, examine, and test. Interview is they need to talk to the right people, examine what are the documents that tell the people what to do, and test what are the tools and services you have. Note that as I talk, all of this is not particularly complicated. It just has to be laid out and organized very nicely for the auditors. So let's go to the next slide. So the first thing is we have 110 controls, and on those 110 controls, you'll find my advice is quite practical. They have to look and evaluate 320 items that support the 110 controls. So on those 110 controls, they're going to be looking to talk to someone who's expert, at least for your company, in how each of the controls is executed. And they may want to verify by talking to someone else in the company that the story they got from the first person is actually accurate. So in the particular cyber GRC platform that we have, which is called Future Feed, we provide a RACI for all the controls. So RACI means responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. This is a great management model. It's been around for, 25 years. For auditing, it's really nice, the R and the A, because the A, the accountable person, think of anything in your company. You have a backup system, somebody's in charge. That's the accountable person. Who actually does the backups and make sure that they happen every week or every month or whatever it is? Well, those are going to be the responsible people that report to the accountable people. Who better to speak for your organization to an auditor than the person who's accountable and the people who report that person? So in our particular cyber GRC, we lean heavily on the RACI, and you're providing a list of responsible and accountable people. Consulted and informed are very useful for managing the organization. And it turns out that doing the compliance actually becomes super useful for running your company. So let's just take an example. I have a question about backups, for example, of my CUI data or anything else. The accountable person is the person in charge, and the system admins are the people that they talk to. Why do we want to limit the list? Well, it's quite simple. If people are naturally very helpful, if the auditors are wandering through the hallways or asking random people how backups work, they're going to try to answer the questions because that's the way people are. The thing is, they may not have the knowledge to answer the questions properly, and it may mislead the examiners. You may get down into some rabbit hole that you didn't need to get in the first place. If they can quickly get the answers they need from a limited list of people, if your company has 250 people and you're just talking to these, 4 responsible people and 1 accountable person, they're most likely to get most efficiently the answers that they need. Let's move to the next slide. So for documents, I'm going to put forward a hypothesis, I guess, a premise, that this is how your documents work or should work for your company. So looking at the center of my little sticky note here, policies, I don't have a mouse that I think you'll see, but policies at the very center is how management expresses its demands on the rest of the staff for how to operate the company. So if the CEO wants to get something done, he or she declares a policy, and then the rest of the organization has to follow with plans and procedures. We call these in Future Feed working documents. These are the documents that tell the people what to do. In order for those documents not to sort of operate and function, they also need to make references to diagrams and lists. Lists could be a user list, a device list, authorized users list, and occasionally to assessments and audits, things like a vulnerability scan, something like that. At the end of the day, all of your documents are going to fit somewhere on this chart. Our goal then, when we have an auditor, is to help them make sense of this pile of documents. They're not random independent documents, but each one has a context. If you're at a procedure, the context for the procedure comes from the policy that directed the company to create the procedure in the first place. So if we go to the next slide, what we provide in the software are documentation templates. So many of the commonly used policies and procedures that you're going to fill out, it all starts with the policy. If you're a management and you're on this call, you can take one of our templates, and Amira, who just spoke earlier, has her own set that is a fantastic set of templates. You want to start by making the management decisions and capturing them in your policy. You, depending on your job and the size of your company, you may then have to come up with the procedures that are needed to execute on those policies. So start at the top, high level stuff, and work your way down. And obviously in our software, we give you a place to capture all that and a place for the templates. Let's move on to the next slide. So test is the third part of the assessment. Interview, examine, and test. Here, again, we want to find focus, but it's very difficult to predict exactly what the C3PAO, what the auditors are going to look for. So here, again, we want to use our prep time to get the focus for the auditors when they come in. In other words, you may have 30 or 40 different pieces of software or hardware that are relevant to your specific organization and the handling of CUI. It would take forever if they have to ask you every single control about each and every item that you have in your system. Instead, here you can see in my slide that they're asking about authorized access control. I'm presenting them a list of some of the items that are related to authorized access control, the MFA tool, the firewall, the badging system, and then also some specific devices where the CUI is, because the assessors, they're just regular people too. They're going to say, okay, you have these tools. What devices, what systems do the tools apply to? So by giving them the list, you're narrowing the focus from what could be an extensive list to just the things that you want them to ask you about. Now, are they prevented from asking you about some other system on your network? They are not. However, again, these are regular people. If you give them a list and it seems to have all the relevant things on it, they're less likely to get lost along the way. What are they going to do with this list? They may ask you to open up your badge reading software. This one is a made-up one called Badge IT. In our software, they can click on it, and in one click, they will see whatever evidence you've provided them. For example, a list of all the scans of the badge reader that you upload once a month. For the firewall, you may have a report. They may actually ask you to open up the firewall and look at your shoulder while you look to see the actual logs of what attacks have been stopped or what your settings are. You can't, there's so much that you could show them that it's probably not the best use of time to try to come up with all of the things in advance, but instead just get them limited to the list. If they ask you questions about a particular product or service, have it up, ready to go so that they can take a screenshot or be satisfied when they're looking at whatever the product is. Let's go to the next slide. When you're ready, you'll know it. I wanted to put this slide together because it's a screenshot from FutureFeed, but more importantly, it's what does it feel like to be ready for an assessment? So I kind of shrunk all of the sections from our software, and these are the things that you're going to need to be ready. First, for each control, this is 3.11, you give them a little write-up that holds all the pieces together. So if you have a bunch of documents, you have some people, you have some tools and services, there needs to be some tour guide. I often talk about going to a museum, and you need that person who greets you at the door not to tell you about every painting in the museum, but tell you which gallery holds what and what they might find that's interesting in the museum. In the same way, you give them a summary. Then you state where you stand on each objective that we hopefully, unlike this screenshot, they will all be met. And if you see there's a little green flag on there where you can write a statement that explains how and why you believe each objective is met. And as you look down the list, we're going to prepare each section, potential assessment considerations or some sample test questions. The interview is the RACI diagram. Who's involved? The examine or all the documents that are related only to this control. The test section all of the tools that are related to this control, and if you have some additional evidence and artifacts. When you can do this for every control, I don't care if it's feature feed or if it's another product, when you feel that good about each control, it's going to not only be an easy, fast assessment, but you are going to know in advance, you're going to feel like it's obvious that you're going to pass. I think there's another screen. Oh, just Q&A. There we go.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Thank you all so much to the speakers for your incredible insight and advice. I'd like to now open it up for the Q&A session. We've got a bunch of questions in our Q&A chat there, and then a few that were emailed into us. So I will just open this up to our speakers. Feel free to jump in if this question, is relevant to you and your expertise. So starting off, I saw one come through the chat specific for your solution, Ben. How is backup done in the Rimstorm environment?
We leverage the capabilities inherent in GCC and GCC High to do the backups, but I'm not involved in that area, so you have to talk to our technical people.
Sounds good. We can circle back to that. All right. Ben, another question directly for you. Have you had any clients pass a JSVA assessment, and how have the folks done?
We advised our customers to wait for CMMC level 2 assessments because there was some risk in terms of whether or not they would be able to transfer over. So the CMMC level 2 assessments, Matt said, would start in January of 2025. So that's when it will start to be assessed formally.
Great. All right. A couple of questions in here. One around Curie's pricing for their documentation. Just, Amir, I want to make you known that Eunice Brown is looking for that, so we can email that back out. And then someone asked about a copy of the webinar and presentation slides. Those will absolutely be going out to every registrant, so be on the lookout for those. Working through the rest of the QA section here. How do we handle legacy systems? Can they be brought up to compliance, or is a complete overhaul needed? Ben or Amira, any thoughts on legacy systems?
Sure, I can talk to that. So CMMC, the DoD has released the scoping guides for CMMC. And in many cases, legacy systems can be granted an exception if they are needed for the contract work. If they're not needed for the contract work, then the question is, why do you have them in your CUI environment? But I would recommend reaching out to a assessor. You can certainly contact Curie Solutions and talk that through, and we can tell you how we would view those items.
Great, thank you, Amira. Another question that seems like it'd probably be prime for you. They say, as a sub, is my SSP considered CUI? Network diagram, vulnerability assessment report, are those all CUI?
So real simple question, or real simple answer, no. Your own network information is not CUI. Okay, so generally CUI is limited to information that you generate or create on behalf of the government, or that the government provides to you as part of a contract. So generally, the government's not going to hire any of us to do a contract to write our own SSP. So that's not CUI. Now, if you're doing information security for the government and you're writing the government's SSP for one of their networks, that could be CUI. But your own information, that's sensitive, you should protect it, but it's not CUI.
Great. Okay, another question here. Coming from a mid-sized manufacturer, what about my suppliers? Do they need to be compliant as well? How do I verify/monitor my suppliers' compliance?
I guess the assessor in the room should answer that. Generally, yes. So the final rule for CMMC says that the prime is responsible for making sure that their supply chain is either self-certified or certified at the same level as the prime is required to be, depending on the level of data provided. So if you, as the prime, need to be fully level 2 certified by a C3PAO, and you provide any CUI from that contract to your supply chain, they need to be level 2 certified themselves. So refer to the CMMC final rule for more information on that.
Great, thank you, Amira. Ben, this one might be a question for you. Do we need dedicated cybersecurity staff? Who needs to be trained? Obviously, with an enclave system, it's a little bit more hands-off. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it all depends on your size. If you have a relatively small organization, you don't necessarily have to have a dedicated staff, but you do have to have someone who's responsible for it in your organization. An enclave solution can outsource much of the technical cybersecurity tasks required. In other words, it can provide things like managed SIM, IDS, and a lot of other things. But ultimately, there has to be someone on your side that will take responsibility for it as well and manage the vendor and make sure cybersecurity is properly addressed.
Great. Thanks, Ben. Okay, Mark, question for you. Jason says, Mark, great system. Really like how easy it is to see the status. Do you need to be FedRAMP certified to store your security protection data?
No, you don't. So to follow up on Amira's answer, your data is your data, and the government doesn't have the ability to regulate what you do with it. So when your SSP and the data that you use to support it is your own confidential and sensitive data. That said, we are in the middle of becoming FedRAMP moderate equivalent certified. Our audit is starting, I think, January 1st. We'll have that done by February because we want people to feel comfortable. It's such a sensitive thing to have your system security plan all in one place and in the cloud. So we're going to make sure that we're already in the AWS Gov Cloud, and we're going to then take that to the next level. You can find us in the FedRAMP marketplace listings already under project hosts, but that's more of something to make you feel comfortable. It's not a regulatory requirement.
Great. Okay, similar question. You might have just answered that here. If a company goes with a GovCon enclave like through Rimstorm, will we still need a GRC platform like FutureFeed to pass a CMMC audit?
Yeah. What we, in terms of GovCon Enclave, we actually license FutureFeed. We include it with our solution. So GovCon Enclave does include the GRC.
If I could add to that, you're going to need to answer, first of all, the Rimstorm solution doesn't include every single control. It controls the ones that are all about where you store your data, but there are some controls that have nothing to do with that. And those controls you're going to still have to provide to the government. What you get when you get this secure enclave is the answers, the interview, examine, and test for the things that they control will be done for you in advance, shrinking that list down from 110 controls. I don't know the number for you guys. You'll have to say the number, but it'll shrink the list down so you have many, many fewer that you're responsible for. And when they are responsible, I'm sure they'll be there to support you during the audit and be able to answer any follow-up questions that you may get from the assessor.
Yeah, that's correct.
Great, thank you all. Mark, a follow-up question from one of the previous ones. So Jason's coming back saying, are you saying that FutureFeed will have the documentation required to provide to the C3PAO doing an assessment on an OSC?
FutureFeed will hold the documentation. So we're the canvas that you paint on with all of your compliance information. So in terms of our compliance information, once we are FedRAMP moderate equivalent, number one, the assessor shouldn't be asking for that information because we're not required to be FedRAMP or anything in particular. It's just not covered by the regulation. However, we're always available to provide documentation of how the data is stored and where it's stored, and have successfully been a part of many JVSA audits at this point. The last one that we did, I think they finished the audit in 7 hours and 56 minutes. They had planned on 4 days with DIPCAC. They got it done in like a little bit more than a day of working time. So the application is supported and it's been viewed many times at this point.
Great, thank you, Mark. All right, another question here. We've got time for just a few more. So Chris says, if we get CMMC level 2 certified using Microsoft's GCC high standard implementation, but then we decide to change our model to an enclave approach, will we be required to get recertified, or can we self-certify with a new approach provided it meets all the CMMC level 2 requirements? Amira, I think that might be one for you, or Ben, maybe.
Could you repeat? I'm sorry.
Absolutely. So if a company gets CMMC level 2 certified using Microsoft GCC high, but then they decide to change their model to an enclave approach, do they need to be recertified, or can they self-certify with a new approach?
So we're still trying to figure that out as an ecosystem. The DoD has released guidance that essentially says if you've done a major change to your information system since it's been certified, it needs to be reassessed. But what is a major change? You know, the examples given by the DoD are like a merger, right? You're changing to a different company's information system. We still need to see that. In most cases, if you're not doing a full change out, if you're just changing pieces, but the management's still the same, I haven't seen anybody being required to be reassessed before that 3-year time period. But we really need to see how that goes.
Great, thank you, Mira. All right, let me see here. We've probably got time for 1 or 2 more questions. Ben, a question for you. Does the Rimstorm solution cover 100% of CMMC compliance?
No, no solution covers 100%. We take it as far as we possibly can. But we work with you. For example, we can't tell you what your termination policy is. So we would work with you to gather information that's specific to your requirements and incorporate them, for example, in policies and procedures. Now, we meet the vast majority of technical controls and do as much as we possibly can, but there are still some things that you're required to do, and you know, we help you through them.
Great, thank you, Ben. All right, I think we've got time for one final question here, so we'll end on this one. How can I work with commercial partners while still maintaining the level of security needed for CMMC level 2? Is a commercial off-the-shelf screw that goes into a product deemed CUI also considered CUI itself then? Amir, I think this goes right back to your point from earlier.
So one of the most complex parts about CUI is decontrolling it. And we've got some breakdowns in the process that we see all the time. So, you know, people don't mark CUI properly. If they do mark it, they might not fully write out the designation indicator block, which is that square at the front that says, like, this is the type of CUI it is, and here's the dissemination controls, and here's the point of contacts. That POC is so important. And it should be labeled on every piece of CUI, should be in that block, right? So if you're trying to figure out if you can decontrol pieces, right? If you want to pull out this bolt assembly and make it not CUI, but the entire document's marked CUI, you really need to reach out to that POC and say, can I call this not CUI? It's very dangerous for contractors to just go in and say, I don't think this is CUI. That's really the government's job. CUI is the government's data. So again, talk to a legal attorney who specializes in this, and or open up those communications with the government.
Perfect. All right. Well, Amira, thank you so much for that answer. Ben, Mark, Matt, Amira, thank you all for your time and participation. We had some wonderful insight today, and I'm sure this helps out the DIB tremendously. For all our participants, please be on the lookout for the recording to come through, as well as any of the additional questions that were put in the chat. We will circle back to answer those. So please be on the lookout. And if there are any further questions, don't hesitate to get in touch with us. Our emails will be on the back of the deck there. And please feel free to reach out. So thank you all for your time. And to our speakers, thank you so much for your participation.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Have a great day.